I know I'm here in a professional capacity as a psychologist, but I must confess when I was first asked to talk about finding validation, I thought, well, what's a good example of when I last felt very validated? And I take that to mean validation had my sense of self sort of affirmed and strengthened. And I instantly thought of a few months ago when I won my first ever sporting medal. Literally first ever in my 40s. I didn't want to peak too early in my athletic career. You see, about 2 years ago, I unexpectedly took up paddling and racing an ocean ski. So they look like that. They're 6 metre long, skinny, sit on top, kayaks for riding swells in the ocean. My family were shocked that their bookworm mother was suddenly doing a sport. But it was an excellent choice in terms of being validated. I don't know if you can tell there, but they're nearly all men. And so when you're in the female category, the competition is pretty small. And so you are here looking at the over 40s female Harbour Series short course winner. But I won't tell you how many others were actually in my category. Could diminish the glory somewhat. Now, it sounds a bit trivial in terms of validation, but it wasn't, because it reflects an acknowledgement of a choice to change my lifestyle. This is a typical Saturday morning for me. My mum developed dementia when she was just 59, and I knew from the research that what I needed to do to prevent it for myself, a big part of it, was exercise, and I had to find an exercise that I was really motivated to keep doing. It also reflects a year of facing fears. I'm actually quite scared of the ocean, so it's been a challenge. And of self-discipline. I have to leave the house at 5:30 in the morning, and in the middle of winter that's cold and it's dark, has the advantage that you can't see the shark fins as they're going past you. And importantly, it's also a testimony to relationships. I paddle with friends, and it's an incredibly supportive, it's a wonderful community. I think validation is nearly always multifaceted like this. But invalidation is also multifaceted. And when I think about a lack of validation, I think of many of my clients in my practice who have been very damaged by relationships in this way. Now, lack of validation can be external, can't it, at work? When your manager doesn't even really know what you do or gives you harsh feedback. Or worse, if you're being bullied at work. I've got a lot of clients at the moment who are really crushed by being bullied, systematically bullied at work. And home, it could be, again, you're finding people you live with are critical, ignoring you, or any sort of abuse, of course, is profoundly invalidating. And then there's the internal invalidation, the tyranny of self-doubt, the voiceover in our own head that says, why did I say that? Do they think I'm a loser? Am I doing well enough? I'm so hopeless. We can do that to ourselves. So what is the solution to a stronger sense of self? There is no end of research findings, isn't there? Data which rains down on us from social media, from TV and magazines, and it can be overwhelming. Hopefully one of the things that psychology does is put some of this into theoretical frameworks. And I want to draw tonight from two. One's called self-determination theory, and it's used a lot in education and health settings. And one's called Bowen Family Systems theory, and hopefully it makes some of the research a bit more manageable. Self-determination theory says you need 3 things to flourish. You need a sense of autonomy, choice and motivation. You need a sense of competence as you act in the world. And you need healthy relationships. And when I reflect on my paddling, I thought, the reason it's so validating, it's all those 3, isn't it? I chose something, I acted on it, and it's in the context of relationships. But let's start with autonomy. Now, in self-determination theory, this is how they look at motivation. So up on this side closest to me, we've got no motivation. And then external, someone just tells you have to do something, not super effective at behaviour change. Then to the shoulds. Do you know the shoulds that go around in your head? Very good at producing guilt, not very good at producing behaviour. And then moving up to more autonomous motivations, that it's consistent with your goals, that's helpful. even better, it's part of your identity and your values, up to it feels good, and I love it. We're very motivated to do things which feel good. So why we do things, the motivation piece matters, even from an early age. There's fascinating research with toddlers. Do you know that most toddlers are intrinsically motivated to be helpful? So if you drop something, even a 20-month-old will just naturally pick it up and give it to you. But researchers did some really interesting little experiments, and they then got kids who were naturally helpful, and they started to add a reward and give them a toy if they picked something up and gave it to someone. And their motivation to do it, their helping behaviour actually reduced, because they'd gone from something that was naturally intrinsic and they'd gone the wrong way up the spectrum and made it more extrinsic, and they helped less. Isn't it amazing though that it impacts us that young, that we want things to come from within? How about exercise? We all know we should exercise for many aspects of well-being, but did you know that it only positively contributes to your mental health if you choose to do it as part of leisure, for example? So if you have to exercise as part of your work, it has, depending on the study, either no correlation with mental health or sometimes even a slightly negative correlation with mental health. So when clients come to me who are depressed and anxious, and I always say, exercise is so important, you really need to do this. And they say, no, I have a very active job. And I have to say, it's not enough. You actually need to choose something that you enjoy or that you can make as part of your life that's a choice outside of work. We all know that exercise impacts endorphins and chemicals, but I think it's a measure that we are so much more than chemicals, and that all mental health issues is so much more than neurotransmitters. We're more holistic, and even our motivation for doing things that we know are good for us matters. So why we do things does matter. Another framework which I personally find deeply grounding in weaving together the data of all this research is my Christian belief. And people often ask me, how do you navigate the science of psychology with your faith? I find that the data and the Bible are rarely in conflict. So for example, Christians have been saying for centuries that autonomy is important, because part of being made in the image of God is that we have free will. We get to choose, and He respects this free will. And the Bible talks a lot about that what is going on in your heart, your motivation, matters to God. So maybe being made in the image of this God is part of why we intuitively value autonomy. One way that we can help ourselves have a greater sense of autonomy is to reflect overtly on your values. So your doctor might say to you, you need to exercise, which is quite extrinsic, it's someone just saying it. But if you can shift it up that spectrum and think about how can you integrate that with who you want to be, then you're far more likely to be motivated to do it. How does it resonate with this? How does it help me prevent dementia in my old age? Do I want to care for my body? Does it matter to me that I have energy? And then exercise becomes a validation of your identity, not just something you have to do. Often we haven't articulated our values. If you come to see me as a client, this will be your homework. I can almost guarantee it at some point. Who do you want to be in all these different domains of life? Because to choose autonomously, you actually have to know this, don't you? Now, articulating your values and enacting them is like having a strong core on a tippy ocean ski. In the waves of life, a good core of choosing to follow your values keeps you balanced. Now, we're human and we will stuff this up. To change the metaphor, we set off in a direction in the morning. I'm going to follow my values. I am going to be patient with my children. I'm going to be such a loving wife. And by evening, if you're anything like me, well, I've wandered off course. And constantly coming back on track is part of what it means to be human. But we have to know what on track is. And so your mission tonight, should you choose to accept it, is to write out your values in different domains of life. so that it can help your sense of autonomy in terms of the choices that you make. The second aspect of self-determination theory is competence. Now, I think it's common sense, isn't it, that you need to feel competent to feel validated. This also has an external component, like my paddling medal, like you're getting encouraging feedback at work, or a partner who says, great meal. But of course, depending on external validation only is risky. Other people can be harsh, it can be crushing. And even if not crushing, external validation can be precarious, the number of Facebook or Instagram likes or followers. Or we get sucked into focusing on an area of being competent in an area that actually doesn't help us with our well-being. We invest a lot in how we look or how much money we're earning. Happily, we need not only rely on external validation, but internal. So I can say to myself, well done, Leisa. You got up at 5:30, you didn't hit snooze on the alarm, you got out, you did your sport. And we need a balance of both this external and the internal. But I'd like to add a little cautionary tale about self-esteem. Self-esteem, as we all know, is having a high opinion of ourselves, and we've been riding the self-esteem juggernaut for several decades now. A lot of people arrive in my office and they say that the reason they've come for therapy is that they have low self-esteem. And the assumption is that if they can increase it, this will resolve a lot of their issues. Our society has really set us up with the idea that we should think well about ourselves most of the time, or there's something wrong. There's been some large, big-scale recent reviews of the decades of self-esteem research. And it's shown that the self-esteem movement actually should not feel that good about itself, because the data tells us that high self-esteem does not predict academic performance. It does not predict work performance. In fact, perseverance and self-control are better predictors for both of those. High self-esteem won't help you in your relationship success. Respect and love, again, in the research are much better than this. And it doesn't predict good leadership. In fact, humility does a better job. To be competent, what we need is not to be driven by a high sense of ourselves, a high opinion of ourselves, but by acting in the world with some good, old-fashioned, dare I say, biblical virtues like self-control, love, and humility. In terms of that opinion of ourselves that's going on in our head, what we need is a realistic evaluation of our strengths and our weaknesses. We do have to avoid extremes. Saying to yourself, I am hopeless, I always stuff up, no one likes me, is in no way helpful, but you would be surprised how many people that's what's going on in their head. Maybe you wouldn't be. If you know you're saying that to yourself in your head, your criteria to screen it is not, is it true? Because if you've been saying it for a long time, as every advertiser knows, repetition and familiarity makes things feel true. Your criteria is this helpful for me to be who I want to be? Because you've done your homework and you've worked out your values. So screen it like that. And if it's not helpful, then let it go. They're just words in your head. But also constantly saying, I am beautiful, I am strong, I can do everything I can set my mind to. That is not helpful either. Either extreme, I'm hopeless, I'm wonderful, doesn't help. That actually is just going to make you a narcissist if you're going to go down that path. Far more effective is a view of your competence that is concrete and specific. It's great if you can say to yourself, I am good. Well, this is what I have to say to myself. I am good at paddling. I'm really not a great runner. I'm very slow. And that's okay. I can write essays well, and I can mull. I find it hard to think on my feet. It is like paddling an ocean ski. Funny this. You paddle too far down one side and you fall in. Too far down the other side, you fall in. It's not I'm wonderful. It is not I'm hopeless. Realistic, concrete balance. We are all a swirly mix, aren't we, of strengths and weaknesses. And a Christian framework articulates this paradox that we're made in the image of God. You and I are capable of wondrous, amazing good. But we're also deeply imperfect, and we can think, say, and do pretty horrible things, if my clinical experience is anything to go by, even to those we love. The Christian narrative says that there is something gone wrong in the human race, so that none of us is able to live up to the full potential, live up to the full competence of who God designed us to be as humans. This is a bit of a tragedy for us and for our Creator, who made us for more. To me personally, if I think of validation, I think of validation in the message of Jesus and his acceptance of my strengths and my weaknesses, his valuing of me, but also his forgiveness. Lastly, we're going to look at relationships. Now, I'm unpacking this using a slightly different framework. It is the third part of self-determination theory. I'm using Bowen Family Systems theory. Whether we like it or not, how you are feeling sitting here is in part determined by the background chatter of what is happening in the relationships of your life. Is everyone stressed at home? Have you just had an argument? Have you just fallen in love and you're feeling fantastic? We can't help it. We're part of these networks of relationships and we are all deeply impacted. And in every relationship, we balance two forces, togetherness and separateness. Now, in the middle here tends to be healthy. So let's say up the middle end of the togetherness spectrum, we've got healthy togetherness. Now, of course, to be in a relationship, we sometimes have to adapt ourselves, don't we? Or we hold our tongues. We understand how the other person feels. It's not all about us. There's a healthy aspect to this togetherness. Sometimes people live a long way up the continuum though, and they feel that they need to change to fit in. The togetherness is too strong. They adapt. They feel they can't disagree. They must be a certain way. They might fear rejection and in doing so give up the very sense of themselves. I don't know if you know people like this who are chameleons, who conform and adapt because they're way too far up that end. Equally, separateness in the middle of this, we need to be able to express our differences, don't we? To act and think and feel independently. If someone you love is upset, it doesn't mean you have to be upset. You can sit alongside and be supportive and sympathetic without carrying the weight of their emotions. That's a healthy separateness. But too far up that end, people become very separate and they really struggle to connect and belong. They won't adapt at all and they might have a fear of being suffocated in relationships. Now, a mature relationship balances this tension. I think of it like this. Here's two people. You're connected in the middle, but you've each got a whole sense of self. That's actually really hard to do. I don't know any relationship that actually looks like this perfect balance of connection and separateness. In fact, it feels more like this doing relationships. How on earth do we balance all these tensions? And it is really challenging. We all stuff this up. And often what happens, we get sucked into the vortex of the other person. Our lovely jargon for it is emotional fusion. The boundaries get lost. Where do you end and someone else begin? If they're really upset, it makes you really upset, or you desperately want to calm them down quickly, or men, you start to problem solve for your for your partners. Your antenna might be up about how the other person is thinking or feeling or doing, and it's hard to tolerate the other person's emotions. Now, when a relationship looks like that, and every situation of relationship counselling I do, I would argue it looks something like that, you start to feel like you've only got that much sense of self, because so much of how you're going at any one time is caught up in how the other person is going. And both people have a diminished sense of self. And sometimes people think, well, that's it, scrap this connection. I'm cutting off. It's the only way I can hold on to me being me and not being so sucked into this. And they think that is the only way to recover autonomy. Well, it's not the only way. There is another way. To work to find the balance of staying connected and holding on to yourself. It requires a skill of observing yourself, observing when you're getting reactive, observing your own thoughts, and knowing how to calm yourself down and think. I do a lot of relationship counselling, and the most common scenario when people first arrive is some variation on, if only he changed this or did this, and if only, and he says, if only she did this differently, we'd be fine. And I spend a lot of time saying, you can't change another person. You can't change your friends, your partner, your boss. And do you even have the right to, in light of our sense of autonomy? And has it ever worked, trying to change someone else? I personally don't think it ever has. Work out how to calm yourself. Work out who you want to be. Work out on changing yourself. Because we're connected in relationship, you never know, the other person might adapt and change in a positive way. They may not, but the point is that is what you can change. Now, another relationship which can be a source of validation is a relationship with God. And you may be surprised that spirituality in general and Christian faith in particular is a significant predictor of well-being in psychological research. I'm doing a PhD on the topic of hope, and I've recently just finished a statistical analysis, thank heavens, I was asking 800 people about all sorts of aspects of well-being, meaning, optimism, hope, and overwhelmingly out of those 800 people, those who said their spirituality was a very important part of their lives scored better on the measures of well-being and scored lower on measures of depression and anxiety, which fits with other research. Research in the psychology of religion, mainly by a guy called Pargament, has shown that spiritual pursuits are good for us if they satisfy certain criteria. Not every spiritual pursuit is, and we can actually unpack them using self-determination theory. So autonomy matters. Rocking up to church just because you're expected to doesn't have a huge correlation with well-being, but if you've chosen it, you've done the work of exploring it and it makes sense to you, then it does. And if you have a sense of competence that you're acting it, it's not just a vague belief, you're living it, then it also does. And if it involves an ongoing relationship with God, they use a jargony psychological word called a secure attachment. If you feel you have a secure attachment to God, that sense of belonging and acceptance, then it tends to correlate with well-being. So being healthily validated is multifaceted. Indulge me in one last paddling metaphor. Life is like an ocean ski race. There are waves out there. Feeling validated is not easy. It often feels like you're going to tip in. These guys have a really strong core. For us, this is a healthy sense of choice and autonomy, choosing to follow your values. They can't be pulling their paddles in too much either side. So remember, a good sense of competence has a balance of our strengths and weaknesses, concrete and specific. And doing it together is the fun bit. Relationships are part of what we're made for. But if you get too close, you're going to get whacked in the head by someone else's paddle or splashed or rocked around by their waves. This balance of setting your own direction, you're doing it with people, but you're managing yourself, you're looking at your own stuff that works. So I hope you've learnt a bit about validation from psychological and Christian frameworks. I also hope some of you are inspired to take up ocean ski paddling. Please, if you're a female over 40, don't do this, because I really want to win the medal next year and I can't cope with any more competition. Thank you.